The Prelude, the Siege of Toulon, Napoleon's debut, 1793. The French Revolution had consumed its king, but the fight for the soul of France was far from over. By the grim year of 1793, the fledgling French Republic faced an existential threat, enemies both internal and external, pressing upon its borders and tearing at its social fabric. The old monarchies across Europe, Austria, Prussia, Britain, Spain, were horrified by the regicide, the execution of Louis XVI, and they mobilized vast armies and treasuries to crush the revolutionary chaos before its radical ideas could infect their own realms. This was the War of the First Coalition, a conflict that sought nothing less than the total annihilation of the French experiment in liberty. Internally, royalist sympathizers and counter-revolutionaries organized fierce pockets of resistance against the new radical Jacobin government, fueled by loyalty to the old ways and fear of the terror that was beginning to grip Paris. The nation was tragically at war with itself and with the entire continent, a scenario of unparalleled complexity and danger. One such dangerous and deeply symbolic revolt flared in the key Mediterranean port city of Toulon. This was not a simple regional protest or a skirmish. Toulon was of paramount importance. It was the principal base and arsenal of the French Mediterranean fleet, a strategic prize of immense value whose loss could cripple the nation's ability to wage naval war for a generation. Worse still, the royalists who seized control of the city immediately committed a devastating act of treason. They invited the enemy in, welcoming the very forces sworn to destroy the Republic. In August 1793, the formidable combined British and Spanish navies sailed into the harbor, a vast armada, securing the city and establishing a deep wedge into the side of the fragile Republic. The Republican army was ordered to retake the city, but the task felt utterly impossible. The Republican siege army was hastily mobilized, ill-equipped, and suffering from severe lack of training and coherent leadership. Toulon was a fortress, naturally defended by surrounding rugged hills, and its defenses were enhanced by the experienced, well-supplied British garrison led by General Charles O'Hara. The French siege was immediately bogged down in bureaucratic inefficiency, organizational disarray, and a crippling lack of technical expertise.
The initial commanders, or the French commanders, were often political commissars, men whose fierce loyalty to the Jacobin regime far outweighed their actual military competence or understanding of siege warfare. They launched costly frontal attacks based purely on revolutionary fervor, not sound military science. Weeks dragged on. The constant heavy rainfall turned the siege lines into muddy trenches, and the young Republican troops suffered terribly from endemic disease and profound demoralization. The revolution was failing desperately at the gates of one of its most vital assets. It was into this desperate, chaotic, and politically charged scene that a young, relatively unknown artillery officer arrived. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. His background was unique and complicated. A native of Corsica, an island recently annexed by France, he possessed a complex identity, feeling both fiercely Corsican and dedicated to the ideals of the new republic, which he saw as a guarantor of meritocracy. He was only 24 years old and freshly promoted to captain after the wholesale purging of the aristocratic officer corps had created vacancies. He arrived in September 1793, not as a general, but as a replacement for an injured officer tasked with managing a handful of artillery pieces. Yet he brought with him an intense, almost frightening energy, a deep, unwavering confidence, and a profound faith in the objective power of geometry, mathematics, and ballistics applied to the science of war. Napoleon quickly assessed the entire strategic situation with a lightning-fast clarity that none of his senior officers could achieve. He saw immediately that the army was attacking the wrong places, wasting precious men and gunpowder on futile assaults against the heavily fortified city walls, which could hold out indefinitely. Napoleon understood that the true center of gravity, the key to Toulon, was not the city itself, but the enormous enemy fleet safely anchored in the harbor. The British Navy was the source of Toulon's resilience, supplying its defenders and threatening the entire French coastline. The harbor was protected by two critical elevated positions, a peninsula and a set of hills known as l'Aiguillette and Caillere, overlooking the main anchorage area. Napoleon immediately calculated that if the Republican army could seize and hold these heights, they could install their heavy cannons there. From that elevated vantage point, the artillery would rain down devastating fire directly upon the vulnerable wooden hulls of the British and Spanish ships. The powerful enemy navy would be instantly given an unbearable choice, either withdraw immediately or face complete and utter destruction at anchor, leaving the city starved of reinforcements and doomed to inevitable surrender. This insight was radical, a complete shift from conventional siege warfare. Napoleon argued his case with relentless logic and persuasive intensity. He bypassed the incompetent senior officers, often arguing directly with the political representatives. He demanded not just patience, but immediate massive resources, hundreds of trained artillerists, more powerful heavy siege guns from distant depots, and crucially, more horses and oxen for the rapid movement of his equipment across the difficult terrain. His personal drive was legendary. He worked tirelessly and fearlessly, often sleeping beside his gun batteries. He supervised the technical details of every battery's placement, ensuring optimal range and angle of fire, ignoring the constant danger from enemy counter-battery salvos. He openly mocked the political commanders, calling their previous timid efforts mere exercises in futility. He was building his reputation on pure, undeniable competence. Finally, after weeks of bitter arguments and frustrating delays, the politically appointed general was wounded, and his replacement, a man named Jacques Dugommier, proved to be a competent and intelligent officer. Dugommier recognized the undeniable genius in the young Corsican captain's plan. The political commissars were persuaded the young officer's plan was finally approved. The position Napoleon designated Petit Gibraltar was hastily renamed Fort Sans Culottes, a nod to the revolutionaries to appease the political representatives and ensure their continued support. The decisive assault on the crucial positions came on the cold, rainy night of December 17th. In heavy rain, high winds, and utter darkness, Republican troops charged the fortified heights, which had been heavily reinforced by the determined British. It was a brutal, agonizing hand-to-hand fight, relying on bayonets and sheer courage in the mud. Napoleon himself demonstrated remarkable personal bravery. He was everywhere, rallying the troops, directly exposed to enemy fire, and directing the complex movements of his men and cannons. It was during this fierce fighting that he received a serious bayonet wound to his thigh, a painful injury that would force him to use a chair to direct the final stages of the siege. This injury was a brutal baptism of fire, a physical mark of his commitment to the Republic that would stay with him for the rest of his legendary career. But the charge succeeded against all odds. The strategic heights were taken by sheer revolutionary will and superior planning. By dawn of December 18th, the French artillery, under Napoleon's immediate direction, was in a commanding position overlooking the British fleet. The cannons immediately opened fire. The bombardment was terrifyingly accurate and effective, raining shells onto the exposed wooden hulls of the enemy fleets. The British and Spanish commanders, realizing the utterly vulnerable and untenable nature of their position, were thrown into desperate and immediate retreat. The enemy withdrawal was rushed, chaotic, and marked by fear. They attempted a scorched earth policy, setting fire to and destroying the captured French ships in the harbor before sailing away in a panic, leaving the remaining royalist rebels to face the brutal and final fury of the victorious Republic alone. On December 19th, the Republican army marched triumphantly into a completely surrendered Toulon. The siege was over. The critical city was retaken, and the immediate naval danger to the Republic was averted.
The subsequent brutal retribution against the royalists who betrayed the city was swift and merciless, a chilling sign of the growing power of the terror that ruled France. But the true and lasting victory belonged entirely to the young captain. Napoleon Bonaparte's strategic brilliance had been undeniably demonstrated in the most concrete military terms. He had transformed a stagnant, ineffective siege into a swift, decisive victory simply by identifying the strategic center of gravity and dominating it with massed artillery and maneuver. He proved that the old ways of warfare were obsolete and that artillery, combined with scientific precision and rapid maneuver, was the future of conflict. The official report praised the young artillery officer's rare combination of character, intelligence, and fearless devotion. Within days, Napoleon Bonaparte was promoted to brigadier general at the age of 24, an extraordinary achievement in an army still dominated by seniority.
It was a dizzying, meteoric rise fueled entirely by merit, audacious genius, and success in battle. The siege of Toulon was his debut, his powerful opening statement, a profound and terrifying harbinger of the military force that would soon emerge from the ashes of the revolution and fundamentally redraw the map of Europe. The Napoleonic era had just begun, and the world would never be the same.